Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tax Bite podcast series. My name is Peter, and I'm very happy to welcome Jean-Philippe van West and Gaspar and Davi in my virtual recording studio. Jean-Philippe is a frequent speaker here in the podcast. He's a senior counsel in our team, and he's monitoring key developments from a European and international tax perspective. And also part of his time, he's working with university, basically in the same area, international tax and European law. Of course, Gaspar, welcome as well. Gaspar, apart from being a key member here in our transfer pricing team, is also very close on the United Nations developments. And that's exactly what I want to talk with you about in this podcast, an outlook at what's happening at the international tax level. Gaspar, welcome to the podcast. Before we go into the actual content, you want to talk about United Nations. I think it's relevant for the audience that we first spend a few minutes to explain why the United Nations are so relevant to keep on our agenda internationally.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Peter, for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Heard a lot about the podcast, so it's good to finally be here and be able to contribute. And straight to jump to your question, why is the United Nations relevant? Why talk about it with respect to international tax cooperation. I think it's an important discussion in a number of folds. Number one, I think it's all about the taxing rights. The United Nations, especially driving the developing economies, are trying to increase or expand their width in terms of how they could indeed increase the taxing rights. But at the same time, why this is important, because it is something that what they are developing today, and I will come back at the in the few minutes. What they're developing a tax convention which will become binding, and binding in a way that once it is passed by the member state, this will be adopted by those member states, and that will be binding for all the taxpayers in those jurisdictions.
Okay, thanks, Gaspar. So yeah, clearly, United Nations will be important, as you say. An agreement at the level of the UN will be binding for the members, which is the largest group of countries in the world. So then let's take a look at what's happening at the UN level. Gaspar, can you summarize a bit the key developments at this moment at UN level?
Yes, so if we take a step back, this is back at end of last year, around November, when a very key decision was taken at the level of the General Assembly of the United Nations, where they adopted a resolution 78/230, which talks about the promotion of inclusive and effective international tax cooperation. What does this mean? The General Assembly passed this resolution for the United Nations to work together with its member states to find means on how they could strengthen the international tax cooperation and make it fully inclusive and more effective. So this is where really everything started. This resolution was passed in November with a simple majority, and it created already in the first stance, you see a clear division between what the developing economies were going for and what the developed economies were aiming for. But all in all, this resolution passed, and the resolution called upon for the United Nations to form a state-led inclusive ad hoc committee that was tasked to prepare terms of reference of preparing a convention that will become a framework convention to accelerate and implement international tax cooperation, and this will drastically change the way we look at international tax. So that's just the beginning of all this debate we are having today, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Aspar. And so there's speaking of terms of reference, they seem very important. Can you explain a bit more what's in there?
Yeah, so before going to these terms of reference themselves, um, the ad hoc committee, an ad hoc international tax committee that was formed by the United Nations, which comprises of 20 members coming from different regions of the United Nations, was tasked to prepare the terms of reference that will be used for this tax convention. And this ad hoc committee were tasked to do this and to deliver these terms by end of this summer. So by August 2024, to have these terms of reference ready for them to be used in drafting the actual convention that will include the different principles and the way how the tax cooperation will be managed going forward. If you look at these terms of reference, what it means, it will contain not only principles, but it will also contain what will be substantive elements that will be included in the framework convention, but it will also include elements like specific priority areas, which are topics that will need to be addressed in the early protocols, because it's important to understand the convention itself is a framework. It's purely an umbrella where you do not have really all the nitty-gritty of the rules. But of course, what is really binding are those protocols that comes as part of that framework. So you'll see the terms of reference that are being developed today. They will be the one that will be the guiding principles in making the convention itself, in one hand, but on the second hand, all the early protocols. And if this will pass, and they will be voted in different legislative bodies in different member states, then they will become the law going forward with respect to international tax cooperation in these different member states. So in a nutshell, the terms of reference, or in short, the TOR that are coming, they will be coming out around uh, August this year, are an important element to pay attention to, because this will be the basis on how this convention will be made going forward. And these are the elements that will be the building blocks in making sure, or in making this convention that we are now preparing, or they've been prepared by the United Nations.
Okay, thanks, Aspar. And what is the timeline for these kind of changes? How quickly can this all go in reality?
Well, so in reality, things have been running very fast. And maybe to run you very quickly into the timeline from that November vote. From the November vote, where the resolution was passed, immediately around January, February, this ad hoc tax committee was formed, and it was tasked to do these terms of references in drafting the convention. Already in the month of February and March and April, they had a number of sessions, which some were organizational sessions where they are discussing on how they will be running the entire discussion on the terms of references and how they will make them, so the procedural aspects. But they also had substantive sessions where they actually discussed the substantive matter and a number of things, including on how they will be able to run this process. They discussed on the principles to be adhered to in making this process, and they are already finished. And to last week on Friday, the 7th of July, they already released what they call the the Bureau proposal for zero draft terms of reference for the United Nations Framework Convention, meaning that this is some sort of a draft terms of references that will then further be developed, receive public consultation, due to be released in August. So in August, the terms of references will be released. Once these are released, then the process of drafting the actual convention and the negotiation will start. The convention negotiation and drafting, this will take approximately between 2 to 3 years. But there are countries or member states like those of Pakistan that have been trying to push an agenda, maybe to have this even done even within 1 year. So we are talking a very short time frame. And if you may recall, Jean-Philippe and Peter in this podcast, sometimes you might think a topic of policy is very far ahead, and before you know it, is already very close, and it's a reality. So this is not different. And the way I see the way things are moving very quickly and swiftly, I will not be surprised that within 24 months, we have something very concrete with this convention already.
All right, things can move pretty fast, and so if I summarize a bit, Gaspar, I think the UN is moving very quickly forward. New convention, they are taking important steps very quickly. There will be a completely different focus, I think, by the UN on some aspects of the model convention than compared to the traditional OECD approach. I think much more on withholding tax and so on. So clearly a key development to keep an eye on. But that's not all what is moving, Jean-Philippe. I think looking more broadly, also the OECD and the European Union are not sitting just quietly in their corner. I think many developments are ongoing. Can you summarize them maybe a bit for us?
Yes, of course, Peter, and hello everyone. Indeed, so the developments at the UN come on top of all other developments ongoing. So there you have the OECD as a key player, the European Union, the European Commission mainly, but then as well now the UN. And if we look at what's going on at OECD and Europe, I would there are actually three big buckets. The first big bucket is, of course, Pillar 2, the implementation of Pillar 2 in countries. On the one hand, countries which are still drafting legislation to implement Pillar 2. But as well, you have those countries, especially those within the European Union, where there is already the directive and which already have legislation in force, and starting as beginning of this year 2024, which now introduced already compliance requirements, such as Belgium with a notification requirement. So that at country level, many developments where it's let's say a challenge to monitor the developments in all countries, and as well at the level of the OECD, they are working on new guidance, new administrative guidance coming from the OECD, which is expected soon. Next to Pillar 2, we obviously have as well Pillar 1, and there as well documents or new releases are expected from the OECD. First, with respect to Amount A, where we expect the multilateral convention to implement Amount A of Pillar 1. Also called the MLC, and Amount A, as the listeners are certainly aware, is about the reallocation of taxing rights to market jurisdictions. And there, besides the final release of this multilateral convention, there is as well planning a signing ceremony. And as well, besides Amount A, we also have Amount B, which provides for a simplified and streamlined approach to the application of the arm's length principle to baseline marketing and distribution activities. Well, there as well, a first, let's say, package first document was released earlier this year, but there as well, there's still negotiations ongoing, and their news is as well still expected the coming weeks or months. So that's OECD Pillar 1, Pillar 2, but as well at EU level, there we had so the EU, like the Belgian presidency of the EU is coming to an end. There recently, they managed under the Belgian presidency, they managed to reach agreement on the faster directive, which mainly provides for faster and safer procedures to obtain withholding tax relief. Next to that, they just this month they announced as well that they will review the European Commission. They will start to review the ATAT, the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, providing input, looking for input there, as well looking on the functioning of the DAC, the Directive on Administrative Cooperation, from DAC 1 to 6. They're looking into what if the working of it can be improved there. Next to that, the Commission is as well, they are as well working on a relaunch of the unshell proposal, addressing the use of shell entities. So just to illustrate, there's lots of developments going on. And to cover all this, and of course, we cannot cover all during this podcast, we will organize dedicated international tax webinars, and this on Wednesday, June 26th, on a special dedicated webinar on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and a second dedicated webinar on Thursday, June 27, dealing with, on the one hand, the European tax developments and what has happened under the Belgian presidency, but as well addressing in more detail the progress at the level of the UN, as what my colleague Gaspar just explained, but then in more detail, because of course during that webinar, we will again have more insights on these developments, and we will of course add a registration or link to the registration of these webinars in the speaker notes.
Well, thank you, Jean-Philippe, and nice that you made some publicity for the webinar you're organizing end of June. Yeah, let's hope some guidance is published before the webinar so we can dive into some interesting new details as well. But anyhow, I feel there is a lot to say and to update the audience about. So I hope this podcast gave you further interest to join us for the webinar. But also, I would like to thank you, Gaspar and Jean-Philippe, for joining me here and sharing this with the audience. Thank you all for tuning in. Speak to you next time.